So when you're producing a low budget indie film, and this, I mean, some filmmakers who are watching this are saying, wow, 700,000 is not low budget. That's high budget. But I'm telling you, in the grand scheme of things, we would call that low budget. All right. You have to be very conscientious and careful with everything that you spend. It's funny, I teach at San Diego State University, right? So one day we were having a class about this, about writing. So I said to the class, tell me how much do you want to pay? You're doing $1 million film. How much do you want to pay your writer? And I got everything from 10,000 to 150,000. What's the right number? The people who are the writing majors, who are focusing on writing in film school, they want to put that number to 150 because they want to, that's what they feel is fair.
Do you recommend people to come up with a budget before they write their script, or do you recommend people to write their script and then create a budget based around that script?
So I prefer say, what kind of level do you think makes the most sense, which is what we call bottom-up budgeting as opposed to top-down. So bottom-up is saying, here's what I can afford to spend, or here's the amount of money I can raise. What can I shoot for that? So basically, you're going to put the number at the bottom of the budget, and you're going to deploy the resources backwards up, saying, okay, I can afford this many locations. I can afford this size crew. I can afford this many actors. I can afford, this much in terms of costumes and wardrobe and special effects and everything. That's called bottom up, because at the end of the day, it's got to hit that number. I prefer that. I think that's more realistic for indie filmmaking. All right. Now, if I was a big studio executive, with more or less unlimited funds, I would do what we call top-down budgeting. I would say, here's the script, here's the concept, here's what we think the movie needs to look like. Now, let's go down and figure out how much it's going to cost. And then we'll add everything up and we'll come up with a number at the bottom. But for indie filmmaking, bottom-up budgeting is more predictable, more realistic. And that's more or less based on, so I said to Dr. D, I said, look, I know you want it. This is your dream and you want to do this, but I'm going to make it into a little bit more predictable business model. And I'm saying that you should be spending around $700,000 to make a really decent movie. We can make a decent movie at that level, and we have a shot at getting our money back if all else fails, because there's a big enough market to tap into that will give us enough, breadth of sales in order to get that $700,000 back. I think that's the number. And he said, okay, if you think that's the number, let's go with it, because he doesn't know. Like I could have told him 10 million. I could have told him 100,000. So based on my filmmaking experience, I'm saying that we can make a decent movie at that budget level that will look really good and he'll be happy with, but it's not ridiculously too expensive where we can't recoup our money. We'll have a good shot at getting the money back. And then I said to him, we should do a distribution and marketing plan to start with, to make sure that we know exactly who the audience is that we're going to sell to, and and how we're going to sell it, so that we make the right movie that connects with that audience. And he said, no problem, let's do that. So we did that. And I'm going to share everything. So that was $3,500. So he hired our company to do a marketing, and it's called a distribution and marketing plan. We charge $3,500. It's like a 30-page document. And when we do the research and the homework, and we go out there, and Araceli was involved in making this, and we look at who it would be interested in a medical drama of this type, how we should craft it in terms of making it so that it actually connects to that audience, so that we have a very good indication and how much we think, where we would sell it and how much we think we would get for it. So we did revenue forecasts and the whole bit. And that's some of the reason why I came up with the number 700, because I believe that that's realistic in terms of making the right movie and being able to recoup the investment based on the plan that we've already come up with. So I highly, highly recommend to filmmakers that they go through the distribution and marketing plan phase before they, one, finalize their budget, and two, finalize their script, because you need to know who you're selling your movie to. Like, you need to know who your audience is. You need to know how you're going to market it. And you need to know this well in advance of actually making the movie, because there might be things that you build into your movie that you determined in your distribution and marketing plan would help sell your movie. So it's really, really, I strongly encourage people to do a distribution and marketing plan long before they've finalized their movie and their script. So we did that first. All right. And I said to Dr. D, yeah, I'd love to make a movie for you, but if you want to make your money back, or part of it back at least, let's do this plan to make sure that we're in the right target market, that we're going to make the right movie that can, and we know exactly how we're going to sell it afterwards. Now, it's not exactly, it's not 100% perfect science, but at least it's a good plan. Because most filmmakers just say, okay, I'll make a movie and then I'll figure that out afterwards. I'll figure out how to sell it afterwards. And guess what? They don't figure it out. And even if they do, they sometimes they say, oh, if I only would have done this, or if I only would have built this into the movie, if I only would have changed something. And it's too late because you've already made your movie. So you do your plan first, and then you've got a good direction as to what movie you got to make and how to craft it to potentially have a series come out of it. You know what your direction is. So that's what we did. And he agreed, hey, that's a good plan. He said, what about this, this, and this? Because he knows things about the medical industry that we don't. But, we know things about marketing movies that he doesn't. So we worked together, came up with a plan, and we all said, hey, this has potential. Let's do this. And I came up with the number and I said, let's do it at 700. So he said, good, let's go. So would we love to have 2 million? Yeah, but it's not realistic. Like I said, don't spend that amount of money, because if it doesn't go, it's going to be too hard to recoup that amount of money. Like 700 is not going to be easy to recoup either, but it's a lot more realistic based on our marketing plan, based on the audiences that we've already identified and how to get to those audiences, than 2 million. So that's how we came up with that. So now we know kind of what the number is going to be. So now we have to write a script that we can shoot well at 700. So the next phase was hiring a script writer. All right. So I know a bunch of writers, and there's one that I thought in particular would be the right fit for this project, because he's got more sort of technical prowess, and he's some people write more, some people are more keen for dramatic stuff or comedy or whatever. This guy I felt was the right fit to be able to incorporate enough drama, but also the whole technical side and medical side of this storytelling. Because there are a lot of medical references, and then we're talking surgery, and we're talking, procedures and all this kind of stuff. So you have to be able to get that right. So, okay. So I hire a writer. His
I just
name's
want to
Joe.
add really quick.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, how you just said his name was Joseph. I think that picking the writer is a very important aspect for each, like every story is different. Like another film we did was more faith-based, so we hired a more faith-based writer. Um, Joseph he's immersed himself into, obviously writing and then film, the dramatics of things, but just we had I sat in and kind of witnessed those meetings with Dr. D and Joseph, and just seeing how they both kind of interacted with each other. A lot of the terminology that they were throwing around, I was not super receptive to, because that's just not the kind of person I am. But Joseph was just sucking it all in like a sponge and putting all the pieces together, and then kind of curating all of these big elaborate stories just right on the spot. And I don't know, it was really cool to witness. So I think Joseph was a great pick
Yeah,
for.
Joseph. Yeah, because I mean, Dr. D's telling him all these medical things, and Joseph's asking, like, I felt like we were in some type of medical seminar lecture and in a script meeting, because it's very technical. So yeah, you and I were sitting there, and our heads were spinning, and Joseph and Dr. D are having like a medical conference.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so we hire Joseph, and he. So the first thing is, I make a deal with him. Like, we have to decide how much. I can't give all the numbers because some of it's private. Okay, so some of it's confidential. But I come up with a number. I make him an offer based on what I feel is appropriate at that budget level. So each budget level has, you got to. I'm super, super conscientious at sticking to the budget level. I not going over budget, especially when it's somebody else's money. And I've said, this is what we can do. So I know from experience, from doing many movies, how much we can afford to pay a writer at that budget level. And I make Joseph an offer, and he feels it's fair, and he accepts the offer. So
Jeff,
I
are
say,
you willing to give kind of a range for movies to kind of
yes,
budget for that are under 1 million
yes,
for
ranges
writing?
are good. Okay. So in general, I would say that range of movies between say 500 and $1 million for writing would be somewhere between 3 to 5% of the budget. So on the say $1 million movie, it would be somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 would be the fair amount to write a movie. Now, some writers will work for less or more depending on what the opportunity is. So that's the now. I should say that I shouldn't say it. It's probably 2 to 5%. I would say the high end is 5%. All right. And the low end is, 2%, something like that. All right. So now here's the thing. If your Writers Guild, like WGA, Writers Guild of America, they're starting, they have regulations as to what the writing fee will be based on the budget. So they're going to be starting at about $60,000. That's the starting level, and probably going up to 100 or 80 or whatever. So it's much more expensive to get a WGA writer because they're union and they're, very experienced writers. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it. They probably do deserve it because they're really good writers. It's just how much you can afford, how much you want to spend on writing relative to what you're going to spend on everything else. So when you're producing a low budget indie film, and this, some filmmakers who are watching this are saying, wow, 700,000 is not low budget. That's high budget. But I'm telling you, in the grand scheme of things, we would call that low budget. All right. You have to be very conscientious and careful with everything that you spend. You have to do the right deals. You have to be able to say no. You have to be able to sharpen your pencil and make sure that you can bring things in at the right level. So would it be nice to be throwing around $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to writers? Yeah, it would be very nice. But only if you can afford it, because you got to have a greater sense of what the project's going to take. And if you want to come in on time and on budget, which I am absolutely, bent on doing, then you got to make sure everything comes in at the right level. So
For when you're picking a writer, was it kind of a balancing act? Where just my thought process goes when you were mentioning the WGA of getting a writer, I'd say like $50,000, but maybe isn't as immersed or like a sponge, kind of like how Joseph is, versus maybe getting someone who is not in the WGA. I don't know if you have experience with working with writers in the union versus non-union, but if there's a difference at all working with different, union versus non-union writers.
definitely a difference. All right. So I said, at first I said 3 to 5%, then I said 2 to 5%. But the truth is it's like 0.5 to 5%. If 5% is probably way too high. All right. So when you're dealing with a union writer, you don't even have that discussion because it's a schedule. So it's basically you look up the amount that the film's going to be, the budget, and you pay per the schedule. So there's not even a discussion to be had unless you want to exceed that amount. But when you're dealing with a non-union writer, it's a negotiation. And the negotiation basically is, what's somebody willing to take? What are you offering? And what do you think is fair? And so it depends on how busy the writer is. Do they want the job? Do they want an opportunity? Because, getting writing gigs for feature films is not that easy these days for writers. So a lot of writers are eager to take the job. And, and I'm not the easiest guy to negotiate with because I'm very particular as a producer. I really protect the bottom line. So there was no way I could afford a WGA writer on this project. It was a non-starter because, I had done sort of a quick budget in my head and I knew all this stuff. We couldn't pay the 50 or 60,000 or more that we had to pay, which is a shame because it would be nice to have a WGA writer. But I feel like, the non-union writers in a lot of cases are also very talented and just as good. And then it's just basically a negotiation. So, if Joseph is watching this thing, he's saying, well, Jeff, you really pushed me hard on the fee. And I said, yeah, I did, because that's my job. And your job is to accept what you feel is the right number for you based on the gig. And so I feel like the number is at the lower end of the scale. I don't feel like that. I know it is. All right. But that's what I was prepared to pay. And so it just depends. Look at, it's funny. I teach at San Diego State University, right? So one of the classes I teach is it's called Business Aspects of Film Producing. It's all about this kind of stuff, right? So one day we were having a class about writing. And I said, okay, it was actually about budgeting. So I said to the class, tell me how much do you want to pay? You're doing $1 million film. How much? And, I just use $1 million just because it's easy round number. How much do you want to pay your writer? And everybody's like, it's an open question. And I got everything from 10,000 to 150,000. What's the right number? The people who are the writing majors who are focusing on writing in film school, they want to put that number to 150 because they want to, that's what they feel is fair. And, some of the people who were focused on, say, cinematography or whatever felt that 10,000 was a fair number to pay the writer. So it just depends on what the writer is prepared to do it at, and if they feel like it's the right opportunity for them.
Thanks for watching this episode of We're Making a Movie. Make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for our next episode.